Spirit of God in the clear running water, blowing to greatness the trees on the hill. Blow, blow, blow till I feel the breath of the Spirit blowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Dr. Elizabeth Shi. She's a university lecturer and works with migrants. Welcome, Dr. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. Could you give us a little bit about your background, because you work at RMIT?
Yes, thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, so I'm a senior lecturer in the Graduate School of Business and Law at RMIT University. And I'm also a Christian, so and my faith has really helped a lot in my work as well. So I lead research and I also do teaching in discrimination law and employment law. And I've published in a number of different publications, including The Conversation.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I've also been interviewed by The Age and also the ABC Radio.
Fantastic. Yeah. And you also have a family?
Yes, I do. Yes.
That's great. And you're a person who has really good Christian values, so it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work you do?
Yes. So in my research work, I lead research projects looking at temporary migrant workers. So there are actually 1.8 million temporary migrants living in Australia on temporary visas. So for example, they could be international students or they could be on working holiday visas, and they're working a number of different industries. So what I research in is the issues faced by these temporary migrant workers, including sexual harassment and underpayment issues. So yes, I look very deeply in terms of a law reform angle, so trying to influence the policy and law discussion, like changing the law to better protect the temporary migrant workers.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. So do you meet them and research, or you research from other people's research?
Yeah, so we're actually right now, most people don't actually know that university academics are in a very competitive environment where they need to apply for research funding and apply for research grants. So we're actually in the process of applying for research grants, but also I would love to talk to the philanthropy organisations. So if any viewers are, a church leader or their values align with this social justice priorities that my research really focuses on, then I would love to have a chat with them. Yes.
Yeah, that's
about
great.
How they can support the research.
Yeah, no, that's great that you do that. And how did you get involved with the work with the migrants?
Yes, so I've been teaching at RMIT for over 20 years, and so my teaching and research have always focused on employment law. My PhD was actually on employment security, which is looking at aspects of the Fair Work Act that protects employees' employment security. So yes, I guess in my line of inquiry in terms of my research work, it led me to more vulnerable workers such as temporary migrants, especially temporary migrant women. Who, because of their vulnerable visa status, have a very difficult time in using the legal system to make complaints. So, for example, the Australian Human Rights Commission survey reveals that only 17% of women who experience sexual harassment in the workplace make any complaint, and that includes the internal complaint. But for temporary migrant women, that's even a lower percentage because they are fearful of losing their jobs. They're also fearful of losing their visa status, and they rely heavily on employer sponsorship. So, for example, when we did research on horticulture workers, so fruit pickers, they have short visas where the only way to extend to another visa is to get an employer to sign off on their first segment of their visa. So the fact that they have no visa security is very, very difficult for them, because then if they make complaints, they really offend the employer, and there's a huge power imbalance between employee and employer. And the other thing to note, and this is really important in my research to advocate for temporary migrant workers is that they don't have the right to vote. So this is why my research work is really important, to raise public awareness, because the voting public, the people who can vote, which is majority of Australians, can then place political pressure on members of parliament and lawmakers to change the law, because those temporary migrants can't actually vote. So there isn't that mandate to represent their interests.
Yeah, that's very important. And I suppose that there would be a language barrier too, would that be?
Yes, definitely. So in our research, we also talk about how language can be a barrier to complaining, and also a barrier to being educated about legal rights that they already have. That is the framework and the legislation that's already in place in Australia. A lot of migrant workers simply don't know what their rights are, or what the employer can possibly be penalised for example, sexually harassing them or bullying them or underpaying them, so they don't have a full knowledge of the employment law protections we have here.
Yeah, no, it's great that you're a voice for them, because I did meet some students in my journey of social work that they were being paid $4 an hour, and when they came here, they all their money went because they were the agency, migrant agency, put them in a hotel, which their 5,000 or 7,000 they had just all went on hotels.
That's so that kind of shocking behaviour from people who exploit temporary migrants. Unfortunately, is a very common story that I've come across as well in my research.
And they were just like they just went on one of the apps to work for $5 an hour, and then the person who employed them said, "Oh, now my brother needs you, my sister needs you," and they had no breaks while they were working.
Yes.
And so that really, I couldn't understand how that happened. And like you said, they had the fear that if they reported it, that someone would, that maybe their future visas, could be denied.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and that fear and that lack of security is really important for the government to address. And my work I'm leading research projects to unveil more empirical data, so do more interviews, do more surveys and those type of empirical methods, and that provides more evidence for the lawmakers and for the members of parliament to do something about this issue.
And that's what will count, the evidence.
Yes.
So on that note, we'll go for a break, but it's very interesting. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break. Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Dr Elizabeth Shi. She's a university lecturer at RMIT. Welcome back.
Thank you, Geraldine.
You work with, in a sense of a social justice for migrant workers. Tell me about which group of migrant workers you work with.
Okay, our latest research project actually focuses on temporary migrant women and the sexual harassment they experience at the workplace. So for example, in the horticulture industry, which is our latest publication at the Melbourne University Law Review, we focus on horticulture workers, so fruit pickers, for example, and they work really in very horrendous, insecure work, and they regularly face instances of sexual harassment from their bosses, from their employers. And some media reports, for example, had an example of a worker who was asked to work without any clothes on, so like naked.
Oh man.
And these workers are vulnerable because they have no security in their visa. So in terms of like relying on the employers to sponsor them and to extend their visas, they're quite often sending money back to their home countries. So their income is very much tied to their visa status for their right to stay here, stay in Australia and work. Another real factor is the fact that they cannot access, especially in remote locations where we're thinking about horticulture industry, they can't access legal centres or community legal centres very easily. The only method, I guess, is to report to the police. But again, this is the fear of losing their jobs and losing their visa security.
Yes.
So it's a huge barrier for these women.
And I know of a young person who was in that situation, and I think, his passport was taken from him. Yeah,
yes.
and they didn't pay him because they said, oh, there's no fruit. So he had to keep waiting, and meanwhile, he had to pay for his stay at the caravan park. So he was paying, $100 or $200 a week, and no fruit. And they said, oh, the cherries are coming, but they never came. And so he never made any money, and all his money from overseas was spent on the caravan park.
Yeah, and these type of issues really need more research and more work by academics like myself, and also in collaboration with trade unions and NGOs to provide more evidence for the lawmakers to do something about these really, really important problems. And also, most viewers probably don't realise, but academics work in a really competitive environment, in a sense that we have to apply for research funding, and that type of research don't necessarily get the priority of those grant bodies. So that's why I would love to hear from any viewers who have, perhaps a leader of a foundation or leader of a church where their Christian values align with this type of research work as well. And another project that we are interested in doing is possibly doing a documentary, and that kind of work is more about raising public awareness. So raising public awareness is very important, because these temporary migrant workers don't have the right to vote. So if a documentary is produced, then more of the public will be aware of all of their difficulties and how they're treated badly by employers and so on, and how vulnerable they are. And more of the voting public can then place pressure on their members of parliament to do something to help these workers.
And what I hear also, it drives you your faith in God.
Yes, absolutely. As the Bible teaches us to love each other. So, it's one of our commandments as disciples of Jesus, to love one another. So my interpretation of that is that loving one another doesn't just include Australian citizens. It includes temporary migrant workers who are living in our community, and there is a huge number of them. So it's 1.8 million temporary migrant workers right now residing in Australia, working in Australia, and that's according to latest data from the Department of Home Affairs. So as the Bible, clearly instructs us to love one another, I believe it is God's purpose for me to advocate for this vulnerable group of workers.
Yes, definitely. And like you said, that if you that the lawmakers, they like evidence, and as an academic you can offer them that. So you really need also to be supported, and it's a shame that the universities don't pay you all big money for what you're doing, because you're doing a great work for the community.
Yes, so that's why I would love to speak to philanthropy and foundations and any leaders of churches about if they are interested in having a chat with me and then my details are by email. So my email is elizabeth.shi@rmit.edu.au. Love to have a chat if they believe their Christian values align with the work that we're doing.
Say your email again, because you were saying it quite quickly.
Sure, it's Elizabeth, spelled ELIZABETH .SHI@rmit.edu.au.
Yeah, and being women, which is one of your focuses, they've almost got a double disability, isn't it? In a sense, because they're women and they're also from another country, so they really can easily get discriminated.
Yes, they have a double disadvantage, as you just said, Geraldine, and their gender is a key factor in a lot of the vulnerabilities they face as well. So in terms of our research, we also focus on through the gender lens, and that special disadvantage that they suffer is also something the lawmakers should be more aware of. And I mentioned before that the Australian Human Rights Commission have conducted surveys, but that is of the general public. So more specialised, more focused research is needed to look at temporary migrant women, because right now there isn't any large-scale empirical studies on the temporary migrant women. And in terms of percentages, it is an educated guess, I guess, because we haven't done a large-scale empirical study, but in terms of how prevalent sexual harassment is in that group of workers, it's most likely to be higher than the general population.
So there's a lot of under-reporting that is coming across. But that's a really interesting thing. We probably need to go for our break now. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break. Hello. Welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Dr Elizabeth Shi, who's a senior lecturer at RMIT. Hello, Dr Elizabeth.
Hello, Geraldine.
Yeah, so you've been working on projects to do with migrant workers. How are people responding to the work that you do?
Thanks for that question, Geraldine. In my research dissemination, which means that when we conduct our research and then we talk to the media about our research, and we also publish not only in academic journals but also in more general publications such as newspapers, and when newspaper journalists come and interview me. So that's a way we kind of educate the public through our empirical research and also through our doctrinal research. And that way we raise the public awareness of these really important issues, and we get the public to support the research and also the employment law issues.
So for some of the audience, maybe you could explain what's the difference between empirical evidence and the other one?
Sure. Empirical evidence is when we do surveys, we do interviews, we do focus groups where we actually talk to the real people who are experiencing these exploitation, underpayment, or sexual harassment, bullying. Then they give us the first-hand account of what their experiences have been. And then those type of empirical evidence is very powerful in drafting, in building that narrative of what is actually happening. So it gives an accurate picture of what's actually happening. Doctrinal research is more focused on how the law should be changed, and how the law should be changed to help these vulnerable workers, and how effectively the current law is actually working. So it's an evaluation of the law, and that looks at how, for example, laws are enforced, how many complainants come forward with their complaints, and those type of outcomes, so legal outcomes. Yeah.
So far, have the members of Parliament been sympathetic about what's happening to the migrant workers?
So certainly when there's large scandals like 7-Eleven, if you remember a few years ago when 7-Eleven was systemically underpaying their, especially international students who are working for them, certainly there's been some legal responses. But in the areas of sexual harassment, there is still a lack of willingness to place more reforms, especially put more burdens on employers to have a positive duty to ensure there is no sexual harassment at their workplace. Another area of reform that the lawmakers can do more in is migration reform, so providing more visa security. And a lot of the trade unions have actually placed submissions for more employment justice visa, which is a special type of visa where the employees, if they are experiencing, exploitation and abuse and, sexual harassment, they can actually, make a legal complaint and go to court, and and be around in Australia long enough for that legal outcome to actually come through. So at the moment, because there's such lengthy delays in the legal process, it's expensive to employ lawyers, it's very long waiting period before your dispute is resolved or heard in front of a courtroom. So that those type of issues, it really deters people from making legal complaints. So trade unions have been advocating that the visa should be extended if a genuine complaint has been made and for that legal outcome to eventuate during that visa period. Yeah.
So you talked earlier about the worker that had to work naked. I mean, I suppose those sort of stories do bring public support. Could you tell us a bit more about that one?
Sure, yeah. So this particular lady reported to a journalist. So she was actually interviewed by a journalist and she talked about her experience, and she said once she was asked to do that and she refused to do that, she was then just told she didn't have a job anymore at that workplace.
Wow.
So yeah, so she clearly refused, which is exactly what God wants her to do, because so she had the courage, which is a really, really amazing thing, to refuse these abusive, conduct by her employer. But in terms of that's a really human story that everyone can sort of relate to and really feel that pain that she went through, simply being because she is, I guess, considered a second-class citizen, that she isn't, treated as high worth as an Australian citizen who is working in Australia. Yeah.
Yes, and it's very scary for someone in a strange country to actually walk out, and then where do they go to? So I know of a young person who was working, as a fruit picker, and they, their money was just dwindling and dwindling, paying for, for the caravan and waiting to be employed, but meanwhile, their money was dwindling, and but the thing that helped them to get out of that situation, they knew that they had friends like myself from the church that he met, and but I suppose some people feel so cornered they would stay in that abusive situation if they didn't have enough support.
Yes, that's right. And I think the community can support that through, definitely the churches can support as you have done, which is amazing. So well done, Geraldine. But yeah, in terms of other support that the community can give, like as I mentioned before, academic research is very powerful in providing the evidence-based policy change and advocacy. So those type of work can also be supported by the community through donations, through also looking at contributing their talent to those type of work. Certainly they can also support by writing directly to their members of parliament and voicing their concerns for the temporary migrants. So that's another way that they can provide support, like advocacy and directly contacting their politicians. So it's really important for the lawmakers and politicians to realise that the public do care about a fair society, they do care about having social justice, and they do care about people who are non-Australian citizens.
Yeah, so it's great that because you also your department needs support. You need grants to, university lecturers, they don't get millions like some people think they do they?
No, we don't. Yeah, so some people don't realise that we actually do have to go for competitive grants, and that can sometimes be quite difficult to get. There are so many priorities and so many different research areas. So yeah, I would love to chat to anyone who's watching right now who would like to give some philanthropic support or some kind of donation to that type of work. I will welcome a chat with them.
Yeah, and it's tax deductible too, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
No, you're doing a great job, and you suddenly have a passion and your faith in God that drives you. So all the best for your work.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Thank you.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. Join us next week. Goodbye and God bless you.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit blowing.